March 1st of last year, 2025 to be exact, I had just began the process of trying to get rid of all the rust in the engine bay of my 1988 Mustang GT. And today, as I record this, it is March 1st of 2026. If you would have told me a year ago that after buying all these new parts and doing all this work that at the time seemed impossible and being on this emotional high because I had finally made real progress on my car, that after all that, a year later, it would look nearly exactly the same and it'd be sitting in the same spot that it was, I don't know how I would feel. And to be honest, I don't even know if I would believe you. But here we are, a year later, and while the car does mostly look the same, there has been a lot of progress. And this progress didn't come easy, and it definitely ain't come cheap. But what it did come with is a sober reminder of just how tough this can be, and an even bigger lesson about time. So, around May of last year, late May of 2025 to be exact, there was quite a bit of momentum going on with the car stemming from all the engine and the engine bay stuff. So to keep that momentum going, there was a little bit of work I had to do at the rear of the car before wrapping up the front. And the first thing I wanted to do was install my brand new air motor fuel system. So off camera, I dropped the old tank, and to my surprise, there was rust in it. With the tank being rusted, I really only had one option, and that was to replace it. The air motor fuel system was way too expensive to risk on trying to clean the old tank. And while a new tank was only a couple $100, this kind of issue brought me into a whole nother realm of friction. I was already in deep between the new engine, the fuel system, and a lot of other parts that I had already bought for the car, so buying a new fuel tank was just gonna have to wait. And this kind of started this whole time thing. These kind of issues would really set the tone for what the next year would end up being, unbeknownst to me. Like, I would have a plan, and I would go to make the progress on the car, and then anything would come along to stop that progress. So, while I built the budget for that, I decided to tackle another project which also involved rust. This time, it was in the spare tire wheel. And not only was there rust, but a couple of holes too. For the rust, I decided to use the same method as the engine bay, a flap disc and some elbow grease. Now, for the holes, it was a little bit different. And to cut to the chase, I used JB Weld, specifically the steel stick putty clay kind of stuff. And look, I know that I should get this fixed the right way, and trust me, I will, but plugging those holes ain't gonna make the car run, so a quick fix now is good enough for me. So after applying a couple of coats of the rust encapsulator, I would call that progress. The month of June came with a new tank, so I went to work installing a new fuel pump and everything else. The one thing I did forget was a new sending unit, which meant more money and more weight. So the month of July came, and I was convinced by my guy Craig to try welding for the first time because the floors and the inside of the car looked like this. He even let me borrow his welder to use, so shout out to Craig. And so I went and bought some steel so that I can practice, which inevitably cost me more money, but there was no way I was gonna try my very first time welding on the actual car. Now, the metal that I ended up practicing with was thicker than the actual floors themselves, so when I went to actually weld on the car, all I did was make the hole worse. So I decided that this is probably something that I should leave to the pros, and I'm okay with that. And so for now, that's what the plan is, and that's what I'm gonna do. During this time, the sending unit had come in, and it was finally time to put the new tank in and run the new fuel lines. It was a little work getting the tank up and in a position, but the process was still pretty straightforward. At this point, I had also replaced the filler neck as well, so the fuel system would essentially be 100% brand new. So if you're keeping track, between the months of June and October, all I had accomplished up until that point was fixing the rust in the spare tire well and getting a new fuel tank and fuel lines installed. And don't get me wrong, like, that was some good progress, but essentially it took months for me to do something that really could have been done in a weekend. And I think the funniest thing about that is I didn't even realize how much time had passed up until that point. But all of that was done, and it was time to put the engine back in. Except it wasn't. While I technically could put it back in at this point, the transmission was filthy. The last engine appeared to have a rear main leak, and everything inside and out was covered in gunk. I couldn't put the engine back in looking like this. But that also means that the transmission had to come out just so I could clean it, which also meant that this was the perfect time to replace some maintenance parts on the transmission that a couple of y'all that support me and the channel had suggested. And as much as I ain't want to, knew y'all were right. But you know what that means: more time, more money, and more weight. The end of December came and I pulled the trans out to start the cleaning process while I waited to buy the parts that I needed. With the pressure washer, some degreaser, and some elbow grease, the trans wasn't 100% clean, but it was miles better than when I pulled it out. January came and I finally had the parts in for the trans. This consisted of a new bearing retainer, a clutch fork, throwout bearing, and a trans mount. Now, if y'all remember the first video, the guy I bought the car from told me the engine that was in my car came out of a 95 Cobra. And I kind of took that with a grain of salt because it wasn't in great condition anyway, so it was kind of whatever. But after going to install the new parts for the trans, I realized that they didn't fit. They were different. And after comparing the old parts to the new parts and checking some of the part numbers, I had to send all the new parts I just ordered back and reorder parts that fit a transmission for a 94 and 95 Cobra. So maybe the story checked out. That said, of course, the Cobra parts were more money, so I wasn't that excited. With that done, it was finally time to put the engine in, and for real this time. First, I had to put the engine back on the engine hoist and install the new clutch assembly. This included a billet steel flywheel, which I had to clean and prep by putting the little dial pins in. The instructions were pretty easy to follow, and I guess the same could be said for the clutch assembly too. This is my first time ever installing the clutch, so I was a little nervous, but seemingly everything is on correctly, I hope. Now, the plan to get the engine out was pretty simple in theory. The biggest issue was that when me and my boy Danny went to pull the transmission out, we left the drive shaft connected to the car because we couldn't get the bolts loose on the drive shaft. And I didn't want to strip it. So being that the engine wasn't in the car, we just pulled the transmission forward off of the drive shaft. And in the process, we made a huge mess in my garage. We had fluid everywhere. So I put some absorbent down and eventually I got it all cleaned up. All right, so getting the trans back in was a little sketchy. And while it's not necessarily heavy, it is awkward and we was on the ground. So we had to use some tricks to get it in position, but it worked. What we didn't realize was that having the trans in place and the bell housing on the back of the engine instead of the front of the transmission was never gonna work. And trust me, we tried and we tried and we tried. But it just wasn't enough room to clear the K-member and clear everything else we needed in order to line the input shaft up with the back of the engine. And then we knocked the clutch fork out of the bell housing. And so after that, we called it a night. It was 24 degrees outside. It was dark, we were cold, and I was defeated. I ain't gonna lie, this was probably the toughest point of the whole build because it took me months to get to this point. And after feeling like I had everything figured out and to get so close and still come up short was absolutely devastating. And even though I wanted to, I didn't throw in the towel. February came and I was back in the garage to try it again. I had to get this engine in one way or another. What I didn't expect was for my engine hoist to malfunction while I was trying to put the engine in. At one point, the handle snatched itself out of my hand and I could no longer lift the engine up. This was an issue because the engine was hoisted in the bay, meaning even if I wanted to see what the issue was with the hoist, I couldn't. The hoist could only be lowered at this point, and it was already barely high enough to clear the K-member. Any lower and I wouldn't be able to sit the engine down at all. Also, I want to mention at this point that I had removed the bell housing from the back of the engine and put it back on the front of the transmission in hopes that it would be easier to put in. And now with a stuck hoist, I had only one option. So I got under the car and pulled the transmission back out by myself. Now, I didn't record any of this because I ain't gonna lie, I was a little spooked by the whole engine hoist situation. And I needed to get the transmission out as soon as possible because I really didn't know if the hoist was gonna fail or not. And if it did fail, it was gonna destroy my investment altogether and I couldn't have that. And with the trans out of the way, the engine was in, finally. After 11 months, the engine was back in the car. I had finally got the wind that seemed to elude me no matter what I did. So yeah, here we are, a year later. And the car looks mostly the same, but it's not, and neither am I. Look, this process didn't go anything like I thought it would, and that's coming from somebody who never thought this process was gonna be quick, and I never thought this process was gonna be easy. But fortunately, this project ain't dead, at least not yet. I still got a ton of work to do, because I gotta get the trans back in, I gotta get the dash out, because I gotta install a heater core, and AC is a non-negotiable for me. And there's a ton of shoddy wiring that I gotta figure out, and the floor still gotta be fixed. But for now, the focus is the wiring and the heater core, because the goal is still to get the car running. I'm a little bit concerned about header clearance too, but we'll figure all that out. So somehow you made it this far, I'm so grateful and I really, really appreciate it. And if you could, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, share it with somebody, because again, I make $0 from this channel. I do it all just for fun, and so all of your help will really, really mean the world to me. Also, I've said this before, and I'm gonna say it again, I really don't want this channel to be just about me and my car only. So if you got a cool car or a cool story, or you know somebody with a cool car or a cool story, and you live in the Alabama and maybe even Georgia area, hit me up, let me know. My email is in the bio, my Instagram's in the bio, or just, leave a comment and let me know. And I really would love to, tell your story as well. But yeah, progress is progress, even if it's slow. So I'm gonna get back to work on the car, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.